This time I'll call the meeting of the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. We'll move to agenda item number 2, consider approval of the agenda. We'll consider the approval of the agenda. We'll note that there are additions to the agenda. There's a amendment to the background language in agenda item number 20. Number 21, to consider a separation and release agreement between the City of Marshall and Nicholas Johnson, has been added as agenda item number 21. Number 22, consider the appointment of the interim city administrator. And agenda item number 23, consider proposals for the administrator search process. So with those additions to the agenda, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 3. Agenda item number 3, consider the approval of the minutes of the special meeting held June 6th and the minutes of the regular meeting that was held on June 13th. So we have the minutes before you. There's also Councilmember Barracoler is suggesting a correction in his comments. And so Jane did pass out that, so the council members do have that changed language. So with that addition, are there any other corrections to the agenda or to the minutes?
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we accept the minutes as corrected.
Motion by Steve, seconded by David, to approve the minutes as they with the correction. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4, this is a public hearing for the private use of public streets and parking lots for Sounds of Summer, August 18th to 20th. So we'll have a public hearing on this, then we'll consider the approval of the use of the streets and the parking lots, and then we'll consider the approval for the parade for Sounds of Summer. So to conduct the public hearing, I will call on Glenn Olson, Director of Public Works, City Engineer. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a typical Sounds of Summer request for closures. We'll be having some of the venues in different locations, but both the parade routes and the closure areas will be consistent with previous years. Russ Labatt is here representing the applicant for the festivities, and if maybe Russ, if you want to just comment on any changes or additions that you might have over previous years, and give you a little time for advertising and promotion.
Thank you, Glenn.
Welcome, Russ.
Thank you. Mayor and council members, there's only one correction to, or one change from the years past for our request this year, and that is the closure of Lyon Street from Lyon to Jewett, I believe. And what we've been experiencing, and we're asking that closure to start at noon on Saturday for the parade. And the only reason we're asking for that is that we have a lot of kids, adults, young children, whatever, that are partaking in the parade. And when we have traffic going back and forth, going all ways, we're just asking for something that's going to happen. It's really kind of a nightmare for us to try and police vehicles out of there, and we're standing out there with vests and things like that. So we're going to try it this year just to see if we could block off Lyon Street from 12 noon on Saturday to approximately 4 p.m. Otherwise, that's the only other, all the requests are the same.
And with that, Russ, the
Parade starts at 1?
Parade starts at 4 o'clock.
4, so you
The lineup can start at 2.
Pardon?
The lineup can start at 2
But you
o'clock.
want a nice clean separation.
Correct, correct.
Any other input as part of the public hearing? Hang around here just a second. Any other input as part of the public hearing? If not, Russ, you want to say anything more about Songs of Summer? Or?
This is our 9th year, and there's things that are changing all the time. Friday night lights will not be happening this year. The churches decided that they couldn't do it again. So we're trying something different on Friday night, which called a Culture Fest. So we're inviting the minority population around Marshall, and I'm not exactly sure what's all going to happen on Friday night, but for a limited time from 4 o'clock or 4:30 until 8 o'clock Friday night, they're going to invite the different cultures downtown in the parking lots to, hopefully they have food. That's still a question mark if they get everything approved. And they're going to have dance and entertainment and things for the kids to do. So something different. Otherwise, we're focusing really. The other big change is that we're not doing anything on Thursday night. That was due to a number of requests that we had from people coming back to us, said we were trying to do too much. So the committee voted this year to not do anything on Thursday night. We're going to focus instead on all-day Saturdays. We're adding a craft fair on Saturday, which we tried last year and it went over very well. So we're going to do a couple other things, and we're working with a couple of organizations that are going to do something on Saturday. But then we have all our Saturday night events. So, and then Sunday, of course, a praise service and the popular splash party for the kids at the Aquatic Center. So it's going to be a little bit different this year with nothing happening on Thursday, and the Friday night will be a different type of event. The university will still have their event on Friday night. Smoke Fest, welcoming the students back to campus. That's the weekend that the students are moving back in. So there should be a lot of activity going on at the campus as well.
Well, thank you, Russ, for your, as well as the other volunteers on the committee, for your commitment.
We appreciate it. Thank you. We thank you for your support as well.
Any other input as part of the public hearing? If not, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So move.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim to close the public hearing. Discussion. We'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Then the first action would be consider the approval of the private use of public streets and parking lots.
So move. Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion. If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes, and then the next action would be the Sounds of Summer Parade approval for the use of the streets. For the motion by David, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. We'll move then to agenda item number 5. Agenda item number 5 is the Airport Runway Mill and Overlay Project. Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This project includes the mill and overlay of the Crosswind Runway. It's on our capital improvement program, and the process is a little bit different than most construction projects, where now that we've got the bids, now we actually do the request for the state and federal funds. The reason for that is because we don't know what the cost truly is until we do the bidding procedure. So you'll see, first of all, a letter indicating the request for the funding. The second one is the award of bids subject to the approval of the grant monies that we're applying for. So we would recommend approval of both items.
Any questions for Glenn? If not, the first action. Go ahead,
If I may,
David.
Mayor. Glenn, we received the bid, and for a lot of contractors, bids are pretty time sensitive. So we received the bid, then we asked for the federal and state funding approval. That timing somehow works
It works.
for everyone's interests?
It will work for us. They're aware that the grant request is coming, so we do a lot of preliminary work to make them understand that, yes, we are committed to the project and things like that, so they kind of have that reserved in case the request comes in. But
So once we're accepting the bid, then how quickly can they formally release the funds?
Within 30 days.
Okay, thank you.
And Glenn, there was one bid, but it was a competitive bid, you feel?
It was real competitive as our local contractor, and you can see the estimate was substantially higher than what the bids were, so we're good with the bids.
Any other questions for Glenn? If not, then the first action would be to authorize the Director of Public Works to apply for the state and federal grant funding for this project. Motion by David, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. And then the second action would be the resolution that would accept the bid and award the contract to Dunick Incorporated of Princeburg, Minnesota in the amount of $592,525.50. Motion by Jim.
Second.
Seconded by Craig. Discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I'm just one question for Glenn. Why was there only one bid? I mean, is Dunick the only people who do this?
No, we have 2 or 3 other contractors that would normally bid, but either there's too much work going on right now, or they would have to mobilize down to this area for the project, and they feel they wouldn't be competitive. So, yeah, it's not real costly, but it's costly to put together a bid too.
Sure.
So,
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 6. Agenda item number 6 is the consent agenda, and I believe we have one item on the consent agenda, so which is the bills and the project payments. So are there any questions about the bills and the project payments?
Mr. Mayor, I would make the motion to approve the consent agenda. Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 7. Agenda item number 7 is the presentation of 2016 year-end audit report for the City of Marshall. Carla, would you like to introduce the auditor? Carla Drown, the City Finance Director.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We have Kyle Myers here from Abdo, Ike & Myers to present our 2016 year-end audit.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Kyle Myers with Abdo, Ike & Myers, and as the meeting before this, we went over in detail at a workshop session the results of the 2016 audit. I'm just going to give you some of the highlights of that discussion. Our audit opinion is an unmodified or clean opinion. We went over the 2 findings that you had with the financial statement preparation, that really the standards say that you should have someone on your staff that should be able to prepare the financial statements, including the notes to the financial statements. And as we mentioned, you know, as your staff gets more familiar with the reporting process and can fill out a note disclosure checklist, that finding could possibly be eliminated. And then we had numerous audit and accounting adjustments as part of the audit process too, and we feel as your staff gets more training and knowledge of the city processes, that finding could be eliminated in the future as well. We also discussed the new accounting standards that were implemented during 2016, GASB statements number 72, 73, 77, 79, and really the only one that had a significant impact on the city was the fair market value and application, which is in your notes to the financial statements on your levels of disclosures for your investments. The city's total net position, now these are some of the financial results. Your net position increased just under $4 million during the year. The previous year's increase was about $5 million. As we talked about, capital grants are a significant impact on your increases, and you had over $5 million in capital grants during the year, which would be like special assessments, state and federal grant funding that would pay for your assets. We went over some of the results of your individual fund. Your general fund for the last 5 years now has maintained your policy, which is 50% of next year's budget. The recommendations by the state auditor and League of Minnesota Cities is anywhere between 35 and 50%. And you do have an amount above the 50% as well as a contingency for other purposes within the city. And again, with a few exceptions, we went over a lot of the funds, your special revenue funds, debt service, where we had some funds that could be closed. For the most part, most of your city funds had positive fund balances. Debt service requirements steadily decrease over the next 10 years as your debt is being paid off. Your current requirements are about $4.4 million and in 2017, and it'll drop down to $2 million in 2016. So we talked about there that you have some capacity there to borrow, and if you have any improvements to be done during that time period, and try to keep a level debt level. Your capital project funds have been spent down over the last couple of years significantly with the construction of the Merit Center and Amateur Sports Complex capital projects. And we went over some of the funds in there too. You have the capital revolving fund and some dollars left in the capital project funds. The enterprise funds, we went over in detail there too with the operations and cash flows that your enterprise funds, your liquor fund, the wastewater fund, stormwater funds have sufficient rates and charges for services to cover your operating costs and 1 year of debt service payments. And then as we mentioned, the purpose of those funds then is to set aside dollars for future capital replacements within each of those enterprise funds. That in a nutshell is what we went over, unless you have anything else you want to ask questions of or discuss.
Thank you, Kyle. Any questions or input?
I didn't know if you were going to go through the entire PowerPoint presentation or not here. First of all, I'd like to say this, that it's helpful to discuss things with you at the work session. At the work session, basically, it's the city council, yourself, and city staff.
Correct.
And the public's not there. And I think you would agree that it's important that the public be informed about the finances of a city government.
Yes.
And that's why you're here, and that's why we have audited financial statements. And so I'm not trying to do grandstanding here or anything, but I think there's certain information that needs to be provided to the citizens. Mm-hmm. And so I do have some questions and concerns that I'd like to express, and I'd like to go through those with you. One is, in the general fund operations in your PowerPoint presentation, you noted that current street administration expenditures were over budget by $61,000, and airport expenditures were over budget by $106,000. Now, what happens is the budget is an appropriation by the city council, correct? And that's, mm-hmm. We tell the departments this is how much you can spend. And so I was just wondering, how is it that these departments are able to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars more than their budget? I mean, should that be happening?
Well, typically you look at the fund as a whole as well. I don't know what your policy is, if it's the fund as a whole or by department, but that's something that you would monitor throughout the year. And obviously if there was an over expenditure, there would be, you can do budget amendments as well. If you want to move dollars from one budget department to another and say, hey, this year we really need these dollars to spend within the airport fund this year, and we can take it away from another area, that's acceptable as well. But typically you look at it as the fund as a whole, unless you have a stipulation that each department is held accountable that you can't overspend your department's budget.
And shouldn't the city have a policy in effect that says how we're going to do it, and whether or not certain departments can spend over their budget by just end up taking money from other departments? Mm-hmm. And do we want that to happen, or do we want it to be restricted so that they spend what's appropriate for their particular department? Yeah. And I talked to Carl a little bit before the meeting here about budget amendments and so mm-hmm. forth, and I think that's something that Carl is going to be working on. And in the past, what has happened, I think, is that the city has amended things after the end of the year, after the fact. Mm-hmm. And in talking to Carla, I think she wants to be ahead of the game here mm-hmm. in the future. And if we are going to appropriate more money, it should be done before it's spent, not after it's spent. And
yeah,
wouldn't you agree that
I would
that
agree
would
with
be a
that,
good
yes.
policy?
Yes. If something were to change, like, hey, a department came to you and said, hey, we really would want to do this year, is there any way you can see it in amending the budget? If you had, another budget area that was not going to be spent, or you had a revenue source too that was going to pay for it, then you'd amend both your revenue and your expenditure budget.
So the total of all the departments was well under budget.
Yeah, it was under by 50,000 overall.
Like snow removal or, somewhat unpredictable with street departments. So there are some natural adjustments back.
Right.
But the idea of having budgets is to give departments an idea as to what they should be spending. And, normally the idea is, here's your budget, this is what you can spend. And you shouldn't be spending huge amounts more than that.
Right.
If you do, if you're spending more than your budget, you should be going back to the city council and asking for an adjustment, appropriate more money.
Yep.
That's the way there's accountability and control over expenditures, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
In previous audits, we've had some internal control deficiencies, and I'm glad to hear that you're working with our new finance director, and I feel confident in the future that those deficiencies are going to be eliminated, and it's a high priority, and I'm glad to see that that's going to happen. One of the things that you provided us with was the management letter, and I think it's posted on the agenda for the public. It's accessible by the public, I believe.
Yep.
And I'm just going to go through a few of those items. You indicated that the general fund balance is below average for our peer group. And there's been a drop. We had 74%, 77%. Now it's down to 62% or 61.8%. Should that be a concern of the city?
No, like we said with the ratios, that's, you're not always going to be comparing apples to apples. It just gives you an indication of other cities your size in the state of Minnesota and what their fund balance, total general fund balance average is. 62% is way above your policy and what's recommended at the state organizations such as the state auditor or League of Minnesota Cities. So I wouldn't, unless it would be way low, you're still in the ballpark if you're within about 10-15%.
And the information you provided us about the general fund balance, it's noted that we had expected a decrease, a deficit of $25,000. It ended up being $123,000, and part of that is the revenues were $155,000 less than what we had budgeted, and expenditures were $50,000 more than expected. And so, in that sense, we had a deficit in the general fund balance.
Right.
And part of, it would be even larger than that. It would be $456,000 if it weren't for the transfers in. And we transfer in money mainly from the liquor store to handle those deficits.
Yep.
On page 10, you had some peer group, or I numbered it, it's page 10, I guess it's not numbered,
Yep.
but there was some peer group per capita amounts. And one of those that stood out is cultural and recreation, where in our peer group, they spend $60 per person. We're at $119, almost twice what the peer group is. And I guess that would be a concern. As far as total current general fund expenditures, we're at $800 per capita, and it's $518 per capita for our peer group, which is we're 54% higher than our peer group as far as our general fund expenditures.
Yep. And again, some of those are a result of providing more services within the city too, and so they're like I say, there's not always going to be apples to apples comparisons, but that could be some of it. You're just providing a lot more services to your citizens than some other cities of similar size.
And the other point, and we can repeat this from the work session, but the comparables include metro cities that are covered by Metropolitan Council services, so
right.
They don't have wastewater facilities, they don't have wells, they don't provide electrical services, they perhaps have regional park systems that really aren't, they don't fund an airport. So they have things, it's, as you say, it's a incomplete comparison. And for that reason, I think it was the discussion at our work session was to have those comparable cities be regional cities from greater Minnesota.
That's right. Yep.
And I agree that that's an excellent thing that we need to do, because you're right, we have to compare apples with apples.
Yep.
But these are things that we should investigate and find out. Are we out of line with our peer group? And if so, why are we out of line?
Yep.
Another thing that people need to be aware of is our liquor store transfers. They subsidized our government by, they used to be $375,000 a year, and in this latest year it was only $275,000. So we've had a drop of $100,000 in the liquor store funds that are available to the general fund. It also indicates there's about $3 million that's still owed on the liquor store. Now, and we discussed that there is some money in the liquor store fund to help bring down that debt, but that's still a substantial amount of debt that we owe on the liquor store. Another item, is per capita taxes. Ours is $642 per capita, and the latest figure we have is our peer group is 504. So you're comparing 642 per capita to 504. We also discussed at the work session the debt per capita, and if you look at the comparison that you provided for us, our debt per capita is around $6,555. The peer group latest amount was $2,400. So, in our work session, it was brought out again the fact that we included that MMU, and not everyone in our peer group has their own utilities.
Right.
And so we did some calculations, and even if we remove MMU's debt, we're still 70 to 76% higher than our peer group as far as debt per capita, which is a substantial difference between them. Yeah. And again, I want to thank you for your willingness to provide us with a better comparison in the future as far as comparing apples and apples and comparing us to other cities that don't have utilities.
Right.
Another question I have for you is with regard to the, I believe it's on page 29 of the financial statements. And find them here. This is regard to the library situation. And in the library, if you look at the statement of net positions, which is you take your assets minus your liabilities, you end up with your net position. And it's basically your equity. And one of the net position items is unrestricted. And that unrestricted means that you can basically spend that how you want to. Other amounts are more restricted funds.
Right.
You
have debt service restriction, or capital assets,
But my concern is that the unrestricted has a negative $244,000 balance in the library. And if I look at all the other component units, whether it's Marshall Municipal Utilities, the Housing Commission, Economic Development Authority, or even the general government, they all have positive unrestricted fund balances. So should there be concern about the fact that the library has such a large negative unrestricted net position?
I can look into it, but I would venture that could have been created by the pension liability. The library's share of the pension liability. That should be in the notes to the financials, but I can look further into it, but that's the only thing I can come off the top of my head that would be included in there that would create a net deficit.
Right.
Yeah, and I believe that on the library, on the pension liability, that's because the library has chose to list those as an individual item and continue to carry them on the books as they know that they're a payout. And that was an attempt to make sure that we were absolutely 100% disclosure about what exactly our position is. So as we know, as those things come forward, we're carrying them and we're accounting for them in the budget as real exposure.
I'm not, I don't have that information here as far as what exactly that is. As far as the library, I'd have to
it would
look
be
through
in
the
notes
statement here a second. The part of the pension liability would be what I show here is maybe one of them is a $19,000.
582,000 is pension and 25,000 is other post-employment. So that's a little over 600,000 of pension and other post-employment benefits.
I guess I'm looking at page 152 of the audit report.
And I'm looking at 86 is where that's disclosed there, just the library's portion. Well, what
I'm doing is looking at the fund balance amounts there.
Page one what?
And the reason it wouldn't be on page 152 is that it's not, that's a long-term liability.
Right.
And
if you look at
the library fund itself would be a...
If you look at the next page, 153, that's where that shows up. You can see that in the middle of the page there. You can see pension liability, 582,000. That's your reconciliation from the fund statements to the government-wide statements that you were probably looking at on page 29 or whatever that page that was.
I see the 153, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, so that if you had the pension liability back there, yep, that would be positive.
But it's still considered a liability on the books.
Right,
yes.
like we talked about, it's a paper liability. It wouldn't affect the way you operate in the... It's just the library's proportionate share of that unfunded liability.
Sure.
To comply with GASB.
Let me just quickly find some papers here. I had one other question on that one, but I guess what I was looking at too was this would be on pages 30 and 33, or 30 and 31. When I look at this, it shows the library as a component unit and shows expenses of $1.1 million, and it also shows, I believe, in as far as the revenues are concerned, total revenues about $665,000, and according to that, the expenditures exceed the revenues by approximately $167,000. Should that be a concern with regard to that?
Well, when you consider that's a governmental operation, if you look below there under general revenues, is there a tax levy down there?
Are you looking on page 133?
No, you're looking at, you said 30 to 33, right?
30 and 33, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're looking there, look down below there, you got 581,000 of property taxes.
Right, that's the revenues.
And then you have a debt levy of 47,000, and then you have interest income of 37,000. So you have about 665,000 of
revenues.
Of other general revenues there.
And if you look at the up above, the expenditure part of it, the expense part of it is like 833,000.
Net.
And so you ended up with a deficit there of 167,000.
That's correct.
So that should that be a concern that the expenses are exceeding the revenues by $167,000?
You know, it depends on if you had some expenses during the current year that were unusual.
But I mean, usually that's not a good idea to run a deficit like that.
No, not usually. No.
The another, and this would be probably my final area here. It's with regard to the Merit Fund, the Merit Center, which is a special revenue fund, and this is on page 120.
Again, before you get to that, again, the pension liability did increase this year too. That could have an impact on those expenses. So a lot of this, these numbers could be impacted. I know for a fact that the 1% change in your discount rate has a major impact. If you look at the notes in the financials and even currently where you're at, if you drop it 1% or raise it 1%, it changes quite a bit. I mean, your police and fire liability went up a lot this year. So I mean that could have an effect on that library that you're talking about too. That's part of the decrease is the increased pension liability there.
Right. But at the same time, when your liabilities go up, that's a concern. And
Yep.
You know, if you're short on the pension fund, eventually the city will have to make up any deficit. Is that?
Well, you know, that's just pretty much the, you know, the funding that the states, and like we said, the city has no control over that pension liability. It's the state legislature determines the percentages and the market rates. So there's two things that are out of your control.
Right.
The main reason you're recording the liability is because of to comply with Governmental Accounting Standards Board statements.
And I assume it's so because it is a liability. Otherwise, they wouldn't require us to disclose it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's your share of that. Yep.
And with regard to the Merit Center, there was an unusual, unexpected state aid here of $300,000 with regard to the Merit Center, but the actual revenues, which are from rent, are $18,700 in the Merit Center. The expenditures for the Merit Center are approximately $103,000. That means, with regard to that, if we didn't have that unexpected grant, it wouldn't be so bad. But what it's basically saying is we're spending $84,000 more than we're earning on the Merit Center. So we're running a deficit, and the deficit is made up by the taxes, you know, the hotel and restaurant taxes, correct? That's where the money comes to cover any type of deficit. But on the Merit Center, we are losing, and that's what we're doing is taking taxes from our citizens to make up for that deficit, and we should realize the fact that it's running a deficit of about $84,000. The sports arena, I know it's not up and totally running yet, but based on the financial statements you provided us, they've had revenues of $139,000 and expenditures about $344,000, which means so far it lost about $206,000. And again, that $206,000 comes from these taxes that we're levying on the citizens of Marshall and people that eat at the restaurants and so forth. The reason we're able to do this, it looks like we're transferring about $301,000 of those taxes to cover the deficit with regard to the sports arena. And with regard to the Merit Center, we're transferring in about $279,000. And without that, you know, general city revenues would have to make up for those deficits.
Mm-hmm.
This is the reason for the authorization of the local option sales tax.
Right, but we have to realize too that, I mean, it's still taxes. We're taking money from our citizens and we're using them to cover these deficits. So it still comes out of the pockets of our taxpayers.
And our citizens approved that 62%. That was put in front of them in a referendum. It's not something the council came up with. That was voted on by the voters.
And I didn't say it wasn't. I'm just saying.
Let's just be clear on what it is and where it's
coming from. The point I'm making is not that. The point I'm making is, you know, these are operations. These are entities that are losing money for the taxpayers of the citizens. And what I'm trying to do is inform the taxpayers. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're right. They voted for this, but they should know where their money is going and how much it's costing them. That's what we're supposed to be doing, is providing financial information to the taxpayers, and they can decide whether it was a good decision or not a good decision. But they need to be informed of the financial facts. Mm-hmm. And that's all I'm trying to do here is to inform the citizens of Marshall as to what's going on with regard to finances.
The other point, Glenn, too, that should be pointed out with regard to the arena is that it opened in September for full operations.
And I made that point that they're not in full operations yet.
Right. And you could say the same about the Merit Center, is that it's still really a developing program, and there's additional programs that are being planned out there. So.
But we've had the Merit Center for a long, long time, and it's been a constant money loser for the city of Marshall. And it was sold with the idea that it would bring in tourism or people staying at hotels and restaurants. And I guess I've never seen studies to prove that out, that it is a positive money generator for the city of Marshall, or that it's even has a good chance of covering its operating deficit. And again, I'm just trying to point out the facts because I think people need to be informed as to what's going on, and it's our duty to inform them. And they're not, I mean, it's your materials, you've got hundreds of pages of material, and the average person's not going to spend time going through all those pages. And so I think it's important for us to bring out some highlights, to inform them as to certain items. There are questions that need to be answered. We can answer those questions. Some things we need to look at further. Feedback is an important thing in decision making. You make decisions, you get feedback, and you decide whether or not the decisions were the correct decisions or not. But you need feedback and you need information. And that's the purpose for me doing this. And thank you for answering my questions.
Yep.
Other questions or input regarding the presentation of the 2016 year-end audit? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the 2016 year-end audit report for the City of Marshall.
So moved.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Thank you very much.
You too. And then thanks to the city staff too. I forgot to mention them. They did a great job getting ready for the audit, so thank them.
Move then to agenda item number 9, which approve the shared purchase with Southwest Minnesota State University for Studio One upgrade of the LED lighting system. Nicholas, do you have this, or who is?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have a request to purchase an upgrade to the LED lighting system to Studio One, coming from Community Services, and we're anticipating this would be paid from the PEG funding that we have and generate through the franchise fees that we collect off of the telecommunication systems. With us, we have a representative.
Alex?
We have Alex here to talk about those upgrades to the LED system.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. That clicking noise is someone's cell phone, just so you know, so we're all on the same page. So basically what we're looking at doing is, as I'm sure you were able to see in some of the documentation, is to improve the lighting at SMSU, which is a shared resource as of now. The original lighting is from 1967 when the building was originally constructed. It is well past its operating life. It is in dire need of replacement. And now is a great time to do it because of the LED lighting technology. The costs have finally really come down for this. We feel it's a very important and a strategic move both for Studio One operations as well as SMSU's program. It's definitely a win-win, and it will be obviously be able to be used for community other community things too, such as different programmings and whatnot. So I'd entertain any questions if you may have any.
Alex, for those who may not be familiar, do you want to just briefly explain the source of the funding, the PEG
Sure.
funds?
Yep, so the PEG funds, PEG, Public, Educational, and Government, that's the acronym for our channels. Those funds are paid by cable subscribers, and those are earmarked funds by the FCC to only be utilized for capital expenditures regarding equipment and certain things that relate to cable access television programming. So we receive an allocation of these dollars every year from the cable subscribers, and those are held in reserve until we utilize them for projects regarding cable access programming.
Questions, Scott or Steve?
Alex, do we, because we're putting LEDs in and we're retrofitting a 1967 technology, are we going to be eligible for the refunds that they give you on
For
updating?
MMU? Yes.
Perfect.
Yep. So and just to give you a rundown on wattages, the MMU rebate is done by watt saved. Currently right now we have 16 lighting units that we utilize, and that totals 10,000 watts of power that we're using. We're requesting to replace those 16 lights with 16 LED, and those will use 980 watts, a savings of 9,020 watts.
So the just slight correction. MMU rebate would not be eligible for this because SMSU is not a retail customer of Marshall Municipal Utilities. So their power is wheeled through East River. They have a direct allocation from Western Area Power Allocation.
Is there any?
So it's still savings, but we probably aren't going to get a rebate.
Do we know, or could we find out whether East River has some sort of rebate program?
Absolutely. We can look into it.
You can investigate that,
Yep.
yes.
And looking at your notes here, we have 24,000 in the PEG fund. Currently, your this proposed expenditure is 20,000, and you're confident that will cover the remaining balance will cover your needs.
Absolutely.
Now, do these funds come in on a monthly basis?
Quarterly basis.
Okay. But the 24,000 is the current balance?
Yes.
And, I mean, how much are we getting in each quarter then?
That I'm not exactly sure of. Carla, do you happen to know that number off the top here?
It's approximately $65,000 a year.
Okay, so 16,000 a quarter, so you should be well covered.
Mhm.
And one other question, Alex. This, I saw the note that SMSU is paying for the shipping costs.
Mhm.
But we're paying for the purchase, and then the maintenance contract as well. Yes.
Right.
We-
It's
through
a,
the
it's
pay-
a split share. So SMSU, it's the same thing that we were able to utilize when we upgraded all of our equipment last year. Whereas if the city makes a purchase or puts money into it, SMSU is then able to utilize reserved funds for those types of things. So they would also be matching our amount in.
Okay, with that idea, in this case, 20,000 for the purchase, we're putting in 10, the university's putting in 10.
No,
Is it?
we're putting in 20 and the university's putting in 20. The bid was for just short
Okay,
of
so this
40,000.
number is just for our outlay specifically.
This is just for the city's outlay, yep.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions?
Do you know who prepared this explanation? And
Both Scott and I did.
you did a very nice job.
Thank you.
And it's really helpful when people do this, explain everything. It answers the questions that most of us would have. So thank you for your preparation of that.
Our pleasure, thank you.
Other questions? If not, you have the request and the recommendation.
I move approval of the recommendation to share costs with SMSU for the lighting upgrade.
I would second that, Mr.
Motion by
Mayor.
Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 10. Agenda item number 10, consider calling for a public hearing regarding the host approval. Dennis? Oh, okay.
Let this gentleman handle it, Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor and members of the council, Shannon Sweeney from David Drown Associates, here on behalf of Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership. In 2004, the Housing Partnership purchased public housing units from 5 communities, including the city of Marshall. They issued tax-exempt bonds in the amount of $5 million approximately to finance the acquisition of those. They're intending to refinance that debt. In order to spend the proceeds from tax-exempt bonds in your community, they need what is called host approval. It's an IRS requirement. They're not asking to obligate you in any manner. It's simply a procedural requirement to have the City of Marshall's blessing to spend tax-exempt bond proceeds in your community. City of Jackson's actually serving as the conduit on the issue. And so, again, the action before you this evening is to call for a hearing in order to grant that host approval or consider granting that host approval. So,
Hearing would be held at our next regular council.
July 25th, actually. So, yep. More than happy
David?
to answer questions on.
Just one question, either Shannon or our folks. Is this the same vehicle that we approved a year or two ago regarding the funding hosted by, or facilitated by the city of Canby for the Western Mental Health expansion?
Nicholas,
sounds similar to
you
that.
can
I
address
think
that.
it's very similar, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This would be very almost exact to that, except in this circumstance, the city of Jackson is doing the conduit bonding.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I was, Councilmember Stark, I was going to mention that we have done this before as the host, because through the Canby situation with Western Mental Health.
There's previous history of the SMSU Foundation for the housing units. It was similar funding or financing that was done there. So not an obligation of the city, but using basically the city's authority.
Yeah, not even as a conduit. Ultimately, they're just looking for approval to spend money in your town to refinance debt on units that are located here. So
Is there a motion to call for a public hearing?
So move. Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 11. Agenda item number 11, consider the approval of the training agreement for the city stage with Stageline Mobile Stage Incorporated. We have the request here. So you guys start with this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. We have a request before you to spend funding in order to do some additional training for our staff. We currently have 3 certified staff to perform the functions of setting up and taking down and the operations of the mobile stage that we have. It's a very complex piece of equipment, and by having this training, we maximize the amount of safety that we apply towards this. That lowers our liability of anything happening, as well as proper operation and maintenance of the equipment so that we can get its full life expectancy. With that, I'd invite Preston Sensrud, Park Superintendent, to come up and give us some additional information.
Thank you. Welcome, Preston.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Mayor and Council. The additional training for the stage, as the stages become more popular, I think we've set it up 6 times this spring now, and most of the times it is going out at the arena where we don't have any of the staff certified on the stage, so we're pulling park staff out there, and likewise when we take it down. So with increased popularity, it's not allowing us a whole lot of flexibility when we got a lot of other stuff going on in the parks. Originally their plan, they would come and train 4 people, but they said they would do the 5th. That would get all of our full-time staff in the parks and the arena that don't have it would all be certified for that cost of the $57.40. Like Nick said, it's liability. No one's supposed to be operating the controls of the stage without the certification, as well as proper operation and maintenance of the stage to fulfill its life expectancy. So.
Thank you, Preston. Questions? Steve?
Preston, I have 2 questions, and you may have answered them already. Certification, does that come from the manufacturer?
Yep. I actually have like a license that says I'm certified to operate the stage. If, say, I let you operate it and then something happened, when you see like some of these
and you
events,
can't train me to the level of certification I have.
Nope, has to be 24 hours stage training specifically for that stage and from that company.
And are we flying there for the training, or are
Nope,
they coming
they're
here?
coming here.
Okay.
And we're going to do it out at the arena. When they did it originally, we had a rain day. We had the stage set up outside and started pouring, so we had to load everything up, and we went out to the airport, so we're just going to do it all inside. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
How many people are needed to set it up?
You can get by with 4, 5 or 6 is ideal. And then it depends on the setup. If we do a full setup with all the extensions and everything, if you have 5, 6 people, you're looking at about 2 hours setup and maybe an hour and a half takedown.
You said 5 to 6 people that we have. We only had 5 that were certified, so were there uncertified people helping before?
Yep, they can help. They just can't run any controls.
Right.
So
I mean, if we have 3 certified people, that would be enough to run the controls.
Correct. I only have myself and 1 in my department. The other person's at the airport, so it's hard to schedule what they got going on versus when we're setting up the stage. And then that pulls me or Glenn, who's the other certified, away from what we're doing to be inside in the arena when you have a nice day to be accomplishing stuff outside.
And I'm not clear about the certification part of it. I mean, is there something in the agreement that says there's no warranty if they're not certified people operating it, or
No,
where does that come from?
I think it all comes from liability, because if you've seen at fairs and stuff where the stages collapse or stuff like that, I think that's where this is all stemmed from, those events happening. And when we first got the stage, looking at it, I wouldn't have had the slightest idea of what any of those controls did. And it'll allow you to bend the floor down if you keep going and stuff like that, which will break the hydraulic cylinders and stuff off. So there's definitely a proper procedure and doing step by step that they'll get. I mean, we've showed them how to do it, and they're familiar with kind of what's going on. They just haven't operated any controls. So I just think that for the investment versus the cost of the equipment, it's a wise decision. Liability and lifelong maintenance on the stage.
Now, we had 5 certified, and there's only 3 left. Where did the other 2 go to?
I thought you said we had 3 certified and you're doing 5.
We had Lane, who was in the parks. He left. Actually, I think that 5 I think we only had 4.
Okay. Well, it said 5.
Yeah,
I was just
yeah.
wondering where
Lane left. He was in the parks, but he took a different job. So.
I guess my concern is, you would think that people that know how to operate it could explain to other people how to operate it. I mean, here's what you do, here's what the controls do. Is it that complicated that our staff can't explain to people how to operate it?
I can explain how to operate, just so that you're understanding if something ever happens, that nothing comes back on myself or my staff.
David, do you have a question, and then Jim?
Preston, this isn't one of those annual renewal cycles.
One time,
one
long
shot.
as we never get a different stage.
Per a given worker.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And Jim?
My question is because people rotate through, could you per se go to a school, learn how to do it, so you can train them? Because that
Train the trainer.
Well, that's it. Yeah, because like I'm the one who trains my guys how to use their forklift. I'm the certified forklift, so then I train them.
Yeah.
To meet
Never
and
asked.
that's an OSHA compliant thing, because in 3 years we could be back at this spending another $7,000.
The company's in Canada somewhere.
Well, I understand that, but to get one trainer there,
Yeah.
so he can come back and train the staff, I think it would be a much more cost-effective means. Obviously, if they're selling the stage throughout the country, they must have something set up for that.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't.
You become the certified trainer and you train your staff every spring.
I can check into it.
I think that'd be good to check into, because we may have 3 new staff again next year.
We're spending about $3,300 just on traveling expenses for this. Not training, but just traveling expenses.
Craig, you have a question?
Yeah, I think that, based on the need now, I guess I would be in favor of making a motion to approve this with the understanding or asking Preston to look into the potential of being a trained instructor yourself.
I can call and talk with them, and then if we can't do that, then move forward, or however you guys wish.
I think make the motion that if they have that offer, do it that way. If they don't, then obviously we got to try them and look into something in the future, because we can't keep with this cost, because that makes, as Glenn brings up the cost of this equipment, this piece of equipment becomes very non-cost effective.
Yeah, because when you look at the total cost versus what they're actually getting paid to do the training, a lot of it is travel. So, I don't think this is a huge moneymaker for them to train. I think it's a protection for liability for them and for us. Obviously, if there's something happens, whoever is suing is going to go after everybody with a deep pocket and see where it falls out. So my motion would be to approve this and then ask you in that motion to check into seeing if there's a way now with this to maybe even come back and say, hey, for another $1,000 or $1,500, I can be trained, and then we can do the training. I guess that's my position on it.
And
There's a motion by Craig.
And I would second that
Seconded
motion.
by Jim. Okay. And that motion is to approve I just want to restate for Jane's purposes, to approve the training with the understanding that staff will check into the potential for train-the-trainer training for our
She has
staff.
a modified motion up that looks like what I said.
Great.
Yep, I'll check on that tomorrow.
Okay. Now discussion on that motion.
A couple of weeks.
Preston, are the people that are training us, that they're employees of the company we bought it from?
Yep.
This is not some national certification training group.
Nope, the guy that came here the first time, that's all he does is fly around the world and train people on stages.
Right. And so, I don't know, it's just, you would think if they're going to manufacture a product like this, they would understand that they shouldn't be having to send trainers all over the world all the time to train people to operate their machinery.
Right.
If it's that complicated, then maybe they need to simplify it and make it more marketable. And if they're going to require this type of thing, I don't know if they told us up front that, boy, you're going to have these certified from time to time, and we're going to be the ones training it, and it's going to cost you this much money. That'd be something you'd like to know up front, not after the fact.
Yeah, I think we did know the training initially. We didn't know an employee was going to leave, and then now we've hired 4 new full-time people in the last 14 months, I don't think that's going to be a reoccurring trend, that turnover that much. You might have, now we can get, you know, if we had 2 people leave or something, we're going to be able to get by. If 7 leave, that's a different story. But
myself, I really question the fact that the company's going to say, Preston, you can be a certified trainer from now on. I mean, you're not an employee of that company. They don't have much control over you and quality and so forth. And to say that you can certify on behalf of that company, I would think that the company would hesitate to agree to that.
Yeah, I'll check just to see if there's something that, I don't know how that would work, but I'll check.
It's okay to ask the question.
Sure it is.
Yep.
Other discussion on the motion?
Preston, how much was that stage originally? Do you remember?
180 or 40? I honestly don't remember. Exactly. 180.
Over $100,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Almost 200,000.
And it was purchased out of the Legacy Foundation.
Thank you.
So the good news is also that it is a very active and in demand and used for community celebrations in the city of Marshall.
Right.
So.
And it's becoming more popular. So we're setting it, for a while we were setting it up every week, and it's like, okay, well, you know, half the parks crews can go set up the stage, so we're not going to get a whole lot done in the parks today. So, but if the arena guys can help, you know, especially during the summer, that's when one sheet's off. They have a little bit of time to help do that. Or now it's setting up out there. They could take it down if they were certified, but right now they can't. So,
how many of those rentals are revenue rentals?
As far as I know, I think all of them.
Okay.
As far as I know. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. The motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Preston. Thanks, Preston. Agenda item number 12. Agenda item number 12, Broadmoor Valley First Edition. Action would be to introduce the plat and call for the public hearing. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The next 2 items are coordinated with each other. First of all, this is the area we're talking about. It's Broadmoor Valley First Edition. This is Genesis, and this is Scott Street going south. It's right on the corner. This is there's 1 lot remaining of a previous 2-lot subdivision, and this then is the southerlymost portion of the manufactured home park. So what the owner is doing is he wants to add 50 feet of property onto the east side of this remaining lot, and then rezone that portion to R2, similar to what this is already zoned. So that's what this is about. This is the preliminary plat of this property, and his intent is for residential housing. So we would recommend the introduction and calling for the hearing.
And there was, in the minutes of the Planning Commission, there was some discussion, I believe, about payment of fees, and they have been paid.
They have not been, but they have to be paid before the final plat is recorded, and he is aware of that.
And property taxes have to be current at that point, too?
Yes, they do.
Questions for Glenn?
Question. It talks about it to allow a driveway easement. Could you maybe explain that part
Okay. Along this side, there's a driveway easement proposed, and the reason for that is he's intending to put more than 1 unit on this property. This is a fairly large piece of property. He does not know exactly where he's going to split the lot, and that's why you don't see another lot line going east and west across this property. Either this one or this one could be larger than the other one. He doesn't know which one should be larger yet. So that's why this driveway easement is there, is to get access to this back lot, this back part of this property that's intended to be in the future a separate property.
Will that require another process hearing through the planning process?
It will not. He can do the split of this property just by a recorded document.
Okay.
Okay.
So you could say the northerly 250 feet of Lot 1, Block 1 of this subdivision, and that's all that's necessary to record.
And you're okay with that driveway coming off the corner like that?
We are okay with this driveway coming off the corner. It was always intended to be that way for this lot.
Are you saying they would break that lot into a number of sub-lots?
Probably at least two.
And so that would be the driveway that people would use, but it would not be a street.
It would not be a street. It's a driveway easement for this property, for this property.
And there would have to be some kind of an agreement as to maintain that.
Yes, they would have to. That wouldn't be something that the city gets involved with.
Any other questions? If not, the action would be to introduce the plat, call for the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by David. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 13. Again, a related item. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This one is just, like I said, the existing part of that lot is currently zoned R2. And the proposal is to zone R2 the additional 50 feet that is transferring from the R5 to R2 to make it consistent. All the rest of that, all of this area is zoned R2 currently. So this would be, the proposal is to add that 50 feet onto that lot.
David?
Glenn, just to clarify, we're talking about one slice of the currently pink area. That's
correct.
the R5, okay.
That 50-foot slice
Thank you.
of the pink area.
I move introduction of the ordinance to rezone that easterly 50 feet from R5 manufactured to R2-1 to 4-family residential.
I'll second that.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 14. Agenda item number 14, consider the resolution calling for a public hearing on an amendment to the city's street reconstruction plan and issuance of the street reconstruction bonds. Once again, Glenn? Or
No, I don't have this one.
Nicholas?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This would be calling a public hearing as stated to amend the five-year plan, road construction plan associated with street reconstruction bonds. We did our first round just here recently, and this street reconstruction bonding would be associated with annual overlays, mill and overlays that are done on city streets each year, and we would be looking to tie this into the Commerce Park bond package. So that would be, we would have the reconstruction bond for mills and overlays, but then we would also have the debt issuance associated with Commerce Park, and we want to combine those together rather than having two debt issuances separately. By combining them, we have a savings on debt issuance costs and assuring that we get the lowest possible interest rates for issuance.
So the action would be the resolution that would call for the public hearing.
So move.
Question?
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. So then we'll move to agenda item number 15. Agenda item number 15 is the South 2nd Street, Lucille Street, Maple Street, William Street reconstruction project. We have a change order to consider, the final change order, as well as the acknowledgement of the final pay request. Glenn, anything to add?
I'd like to add one thing. If you look at the original bid price of about $1,300,000 and the final price after all change orders of $100 less, I don't think I've ever seen that in my history of my career. So it's one of those things where I think the plans were good, the construction was good, the participation of the property owners was good, and would recommend approval.
And adding to that, it was a complex project.
It was really complex. We postponed that project once because of property ownership and discussions, and worked with all of the property owners on their driveways and now we'll be starting the special assessment process next week probably. So
Glenn,
that's an interesting one.
You're being a little modest. This looks like it's 19 cents less than 100. That really is one for the books.
Yeah, it is one for the books.
So with that, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Steve, seconded by David, to approve the final change order with D&G Excavating and acknowledge the final payment application. Discussion on that motion? If not, we'll move to a vote.
Yeah, our stuff's running good over here. What's going on over there? I don't know.
I found it. It came back.
Motion passes. Agenda item number 16. Agenda item number 16, the Commerce Industrial Park Michigan Road Improvement. Consider the encroachment agreement with Magellan Pipeline Company for the water and sewer crossing. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. First of all, I'll say that we haven't heard results yet on the deed grant, so we get that conversation out of the way first. The second part about is this is an agreement with Magellan Pipeline that's required because they have an existing easement over the property, and we have to get easements from them to cross their pipeline. Attorney Simpson might have a couple of comments. He's still working with them, I think, on a couple of tweaks of distances. I don't know if you've heard back. I think maybe a comment on that.
We went through the same, well, anytime you approach a natural gas pipeline, they're very hesitant to give you permission to encroach in their area, and you have to abide by Magellan's rules. There's liability and damages questions. They want more higher limits on the insurance than the city is required to have by statute. So it's a negotiation process. We went through the same thing on the Air Park East. We requested changes to their standard agreement in 2012. We got the requested changes. I've made those same requests. The person who has to approve it is out of the office until tomorrow. So there are legal questions that were asked. And then there's also some engineering questions. The water line has to be a minimum of 2 feet below their existing natural gas line, and the storm sewer is supposed to be 10.5 feet underneath that. That's pretty deep, so we're requesting that we be allowed to have some field adjustments as may be necessary. I've requested, could we get within 6 feet? You know, so that allows us some flexibility. Have not yet heard back on the engineering or the legal questions.
Right. Glenn, is there any special materials requirement within that zone?
We have a specification of materials, and then they approve that as well.
Right.
Good. Okay.
It's PVC water line, but the sewer lines had to be reinforced concrete pipe
Right.
or polyurethane. So yes, there are requirements, and then every time you cross over their line, there's got to be like 3 or 4 feet of earth over the top. Wheeled vehicles can cross, tracked vehicles cannot cross. Yeah, so it's pretty specific on the equipment that can be used in the encroachment over their facility.
Just in a point of clarification, this is actually a refined petroleum products line, not a natural gas line.
That's correct.
And no, that's fine. But it has an impact on materials. And the only question or observation that I have is that we, and you've probably already done this, but I'm going to do it just for the good of the whole, is that we look at materials similar to another public works project that we would do where we believe that we're going to run into petroleum impacts, and that we use materials that are not susceptible to refined petroleum product.
Mm-hmm.
The part that we're modifying and where we're crossing is in pretty close proximity to an incident that they had in the 90s there, which I believe is 100% recovered, but there's still potentials that we could have either historic or legacy impacts, or we could have future impacts. And I think it's to our benefit within a certain, probably 50 feet on either side, that we use materials that would not permeate hydrocarbons.
And that's what we have.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think there have to be some sleeving of that stuff underneath there. That's,
Just to make sure. So
every joint has to be carefully put together too.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
When we do the project, I noticed that there's, when we get close to the pipeline, we're supposed to have, they're going to have on-site representatives there to keep an eye on things. And so when we contract this out, the contractor aware of all these requirements, that they don't violate any of these requirements?
Yes, they are. Yes.
The other thing that stuck out in my mind was when we get close to the pipeline, there has to be hand digging.
Yes, and probing. Usually when you come within so many feet of it, then you start probing for the location of it before you actually excavate down to it. And the contractors that work with, the contractors that we would have on this job are familiar with that operation as well.
We actually do most of the people that would bid on our project do subcontractor work for Magellan.
Yeah.
So they're very familiar
So
with Magellan.
we're comfortable with the contractors that work there. Also with the excavation process, I believe it's like 48 hours minimum. And then except for weekends and holidays, well, we wouldn't let them work there on weekends or holidays anyway. So we're pretty well covered by the requirements of Magellan.
And Magellan's used to having these crossings because they're running through residential populated areas. I mean, you'd be amazed at the construction encroachment in the pipeline right away. So.
One other point, Glenn, you would expect that the total bid on this project might be considered at the July 11th meeting?
Yes. We are asking for some sort of indication by next Monday. Whether we get there or not, it's another thing, but we'll see.
Any other questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
So move.
Motion by Craig, seconded by David. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 17. Agenda item number 17, consider the amendment to the agreement for services between the City of Marshall and Randy Walker. Nicholas.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The original agreement we had with Randy Walker, and this is for the Spirit of the Community sculpture, as part of the Avera Plaza by the Red Baron Arena and Expo, had original dates of having the artwork fabricated and delivered by July 1st, and then installation of artwork by August 15th. This has been delayed by the exploration of the potential of the Hotel and Conference Center project. If that had been a go, we wanted to augment this project to fit within that whole development as a whole, to really enhance and treat the whole project as one rather than piecemeal coming together. Since that project was not a go, we're reverting back to more of an original state with this, but that caused a delay in implementation of it. So we're requesting that this be moved, that we have an agreement amendment, and that's be moved back to October 16th. And we had discussions with MAFAC and as well as Randy Walker, and they felt this was acceptable.
Questions?
I move approval of the amendment to the agreement for services.
Second. Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim. Discussion?
So The sculpture would be different if there had been a motel. I mean, it wouldn't be the same sculpture, or what?
It would have been similar, but we're looking at modifying it slightly so it would fit within that whole landscape as a whole, rather than we have an arena, we have a sculpture, then we have the hotel and conference center. We would have the architects working together so that it all blended together very nicely and really enhanced the area.
Can I assume Avera's been notified of this change too?
Yes, they have.
Other discussion on the motion?
So he fabricates this structure, and then he's also responsible for putting it on the ground and having a foundation for it, or?
We as the owner are responsible for developing the site for that, but that is in coordination with Randy Walker as the artist.
Our crew will pour the cement, right? Our crew will put the footings down.
Yep, we will be, Glenn's department is working, has those plans and specifications, and we'll be working out, getting quotes for that work.
Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 18. Agenda item number 18, consider the approval of temporary on-sale liquor license for Southwest Minnesota State University for an event September 16, 2017. Any questions about this?
Move approval.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Steve. Discussion? If not, all in favor say aye, or we'll move to a vote. Motion passed and one abstention. Agenda item number 19. Agenda item number 19, consider the approval of a temporary on-sale liquor license for Southwest Minnesota State University. Once again, any questions about this?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 20 is a summary of the conclusions of the evaluation of the performance of the city administrator Nicholas Johnson. The city, I do have the report out posted on the screen. No need for me to read all of that, but I'll summarize that the June 13th as well as June 26th, the council did meet in closed session as per state open meeting law. For the purposes of the performance evaluation, we did do a thorough evaluation, and as a result, the city has had discussion with Administrator Johnson, and we mutually have agreed that a separation of employment agreement would be in the best interest of the city as well as Mr. Johnson, which is the next agenda item. So agenda item number 21 would be to consider the separation and release agreement between the city of Marshall and Nicholas Johnson.
Mr. Mayor, do we need to approve the?
There's no action that's needed on the report.
Okay, thank you.
So the separation agreement then is agenda item number 21. This is private information until acted on by the council, and then it will become public information. So that's the reason the separation agreement can be viewed by the council, but at this point it's not viewable yet on the public access. So with that, Nicholas, do you want to make a statement at this point? You don't have to, but you can.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to. I'd like to say I'm deeply thankful for and genuinely appreciate City Council's support during my time as your city administrator. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve you and the citizens of Marshall over the past year. We have seen the progressing development of a new industrial park, the grand opening of the Red Baron Arena and Expo, the finishing touches of an amazing bike trail, improvements to our streets and recreational areas, and continued economic development growth. This vibrant community is a wonderful place, and I truly appreciate having been a part of it. I am convinced Marshall will continue its progress and growth into the future. Most of all, I have been given the opportunity to work with an exceptionally dedicated and skilled staff for the City of Marshall. and never cease to impress me their desire and drive to do what is best for this city and to make it a better place. I'm exceedingly grateful for all the hard work our employees have put in to help make Marshall the great community it is. The projects and progress I've mentioned do not happen because of one person. They happen through the efforts of all, and my staff have been instrumental. I cannot thank them enough for what they do. My passion for being in the line of work that I am comes from a deep-seated desire to serve people, help citizens, and improve lives. I believe that is the core focus of any individual who commits themselves to public service, especially as a city administrator. They are driven to those ideals of continually making their communities a better place to live. Like any organization, there is a leadership style which best fits with that organization. In my time as city administrator for the city of Marshall and the privilege and honor it has brought me, I believe the leadership needs of the city are best served by another who may provide that style. It has been my pleasure to serve you all. I could not have asked for a more supportive city council and staff. I will treasure the times and friendships I have made here. Thank you for the opportunity to be your city administrator.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for your service to the community and your professionalism in the past year. I would entertain a motion to enter into the separation and release agreement between the city marshal and Nicholas Johnson. Motion by David, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we will move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 22. Be to consider the appointment of the city administrator. It would be my recommendation that the council appoint Sheila Dubbs as interim city administrator in addition to her current duties as human resource manager. And that would also include a 10% augmentation for the period of time that she would serve in that capacity.
I would move that, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Motion by Steve, seconded by Jim. Discussion?
I guess I have some concerns about this. Sheila Dubbs is the full-time human resource director for the city of Marshall. It's a full-time job. The city administrator position is a full-time job. I don't know how a person can do two full-time jobs at the same time. Either they're going to short one of those areas, either the city administrator position or the human resource position. And I think the city should look at the possibility of hiring an interim city administrator from outside the city staff. I think we should look at that, see what's available, and consider that. Who's available? Can they handle a position? We should look at that option before we take this action. We do not know how long the city administrator position will be open. Could be open 3 months, 6 months, who knows? It depends on the search process. We have some important things coming up. We've got a budget to prepare, and we have staff that need to be supervised. And I think it would be in the best interest of the city to at least explore the option of going outside the city and see who is available to fill the position of interim city administrator. And like I said, my concern is you're asking a person to do two full-time jobs at the same time. The human resource director is not an expert in finance. She's not an expert in a lot of the positions that a city administrator. Her daily tasks are not the same as that of a city administrator. And to ask her to come in and step in and do the job of a city administrator, I don't think is fair. And if we're really concerned about having a top-notch person in that position, then and one that has experience and knowledge in the area of city administration, I think we should at least examine and explore the possibility of finding an outside person to fill that position.
I can make a couple of comments on that. Craig, you also want to make a comment?
Yeah, you want to go first?
I can. Let me hit on a couple points, and Glenn, you and I have had a discussion on this prior to the meeting too. I have had conversations with Sheila, and while I do recognize and agree that she has a full plate and is a busy person, she is willing to take on this task as she did prior to that too. Let me say one other thing. When we go through a transition like this, that also will mean that the other leadership within the city, whether they be division heads or department heads, they also will be part of the team that will certainly have to take on some additional responsibilities during this interim period. In terms of the option of going external for a interim city administrator, I think one of the challenges, and I've done some checking on this, it's certainly not a plethora of candidates that are interested in doing that, and certainly not interested in doing that in full time. And there's that additional cost of, which is typically over and above substantially what that salary schedule is for the permanent person. And then finally, the other issue is that going external for an interim does require a search. And it would be my preference to, if we're doing a search, let's do a search for the permanent candidate rather than doing two searches. So respect your view, but that's also my view too.
And just a quick response, and maybe your approach is the correct one. What I'm saying is that I'd like the opportunity to at least look and see what's out there. And if there's a good fit, if there's a person out there that's willing to do it and it would work for the city, why not at least explore that option? We're not even exploring that option. And I feel when you make important decisions, my children often look at me and say, Glenn, when you buy something, you don't just go in the store and buy it. You shop around and you explore, you do research. You want to make sure it's the right decision. And this is an important decision. And all I'm saying is why not explore the options, see what's available, and maybe having Sheila do the interim position is the correct way to go, but we don't necessarily know that unless we've looked at the various options.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and you and I have also discussed this scenario about, what would we do as an interim. And I respect what Councilman Barracola is saying, and even if we did that and looked for a temporary for an interim, that's going to take some time. And between now and then, we need an acting city administrator. There is a legal function that position performs, and we need that. So irregardless whether we do an interim that's an outside source while we do the search, or we go directly into a search for a replacement, we need an interim, most likely from within. And so either way, we have to do this. And Sheila's willing to do it. And, I think we understand that there's a lot of things we kind of put into idle mode as we're going through, and we do a sustain operation at best. But irregardless if we follow Councilman Barracola's plan or not, we still need to have this position filled, and we need to act on it tonight. And with that, I move that we appoint Sheila Dubs as interim city administrator.
We've got a motion already on the
we
floor,
do.
don't we?
Is there a second too?
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. So that's my way. And the mayor and I have talked about this in the past. And Glenn, I brought up the same issue that perhaps there's some benefit in having that expertise in and can actually help with the acclimation of the successful candidate of the search piece. And I respectfully submit to the mayor's position. We've had a detailed conversation about it in the last couple of weeks, and I submit to his opinion.
Other discussion on the motion?
Just go ahead.
Well, I concur with Craig. And like Nick said, he has an excellent staff that somebody needs to fill that role tomorrow. And one search is good and work from there, because we got to be cost effective for the taxpayers too in the process.
Discussion on the motion?
One last comment. In the past, I believe that we had some lead time to do something about this, where the city administrator did not leave right away, where we had some advanced time and where we could make arrangements for things. And perhaps the city, if it had been prudent in this, would have put into the separation agreement that the present city administrator would fulfill this role for a certain period of time while we went out and did a search.
Other discussion on the motion? If not, we will move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 23. Consider proposals for the city administrator search process. This, as the council knows, gets a little bit complicated in that we are currently under contract with David Drown and Associates, and if we would choose to continue with them, they would provide the search services at no cost to the city as part of their original commitment and contract with the city. The cost to the city would be with the exception of the of direct expenses such as advertising. We did. You do also have a secondary or a second proposal, and that's from Springset Water's executive search proposal. They had provided a proposal just over a year ago also. Basically, they updated their proposal and said their proposal from March of 2016, they would still honor that. There was a question that one of the council members had asked me about an additional firm that was used were when Ben Martic was hired, and that was actually Springset Waters, and the firm prior to that was Brimmeyer and Associates. So the choice before you, and let me say one other thing, the David Drown and Associates, should we choose to continue with that current contract, in his cover letter, he does have some additional, Mr. Gary Wires has some additional detail about some modifications they've made to the search process that provide some additional information prior to the finalist selections, as well as some additional background checking. And there is a timeline in there. One of the pieces of his timeline that does add some additional time, but probably there is value in that, is taking time for individual conversations, which I believe are on, the date is July 13th, with each of the council members individually, so you have the opportunity for full input. Would also meet with division and department staff at the same time. Adds about a week to the process, but probably is a good addition to that. The Springset Waters search proposal does not have an updated timeline, but based on looking at their timeline proposal from March of 2016, it was roughly the same amount of time that was taken. So I'd open it up for general discussion that the council has.
If we should go with DDA Human Resources, do we have some option as to what individual would be primarily in charge of the search? Where
it would be the same individual, it would be Gary Wires.
So we would have no choice in designating another person.
He's the principal that is doing that. They list other people, but I think they are more behind the scenes people that do some legwork, background work. Jim?
My opinion, my feelings on this is we've paid them. So if we go to another search firm, we're paying another, I read $20,000. As somebody who does work contracting, sometimes stuff doesn't work out, and I got to go back and do it over again. It's just a simple fact of running a business. I'm not saying it's right or wrong or anything, but that's a fact of running a business. Sometimes stuff doesn't work out, and you got to do it over. It is. I think, in my opinion, our best option is to stick with the first firm, the firm we've paid to do this. Motion? I make a motion that we go with DDA Human Resources.
Motion by Jim, seconded by David. Now discussion on the motion.
May I add the comment that we've had some discussion about what our expectations are for this search process. I have some confidence those expectations have been conveyed, at least initially, and that each of us meeting with Mr. Wires individually and collectively can amplify those expectations. That's a very important reason why I'm comfortable taking up the Drown firm for this task.
I agree with your comments also. Just one clarification or point of clarification in the David Drown and Associates, there is an option that for some additional psychological testing, I'll call it, I would assume that is not part of the motion.
As of this point, no.
Well, it's not part of the second. I just wanted to clarify that. So, and I agree with that point. So, discussion on the motion.
There's a saying that you get what you pay for. And the idea is that sometimes what looks like the best financial deal is not the best deal in the long run. I guess I'm wondering, from the city council standpoint, we've worked with this person in the past. If you approve this, I assume that you're satisfied with the work he does and feel like it's a reputable firm that you would like to have work for us again. Because
that would be correct if the motion does pass, sure. Other discussion on the motion? If not, we will move to a vote. The motion passes. Agenda item number 24. Commission Board Liaison Report. The Regional Development Commission has not met since we last met, but the Area Transportation Partnership did meet, and I represent the Southwest Regional Development Commission on that board. Glenn and I were both in attendance at that meeting in Granite Falls last week. There was the approval of the ATP plan, which is basically the 5-year allocation of federal dollars within the region. There was also a construction update, and I think perhaps one of the updates is Highway 19 that Glenn helped me the second week of August through the end of September. They expect that road to be resurfaced, and Glenn, I'll let you describe the process that's going to be used. It's kind of an innovative process.
Yeah, it's a cold in-place recycling process. There won't be a detour set up. It's a large machine that pulls up mills up the existing asphalt and adds oil to it and lays it back down behind the machine and then gets compacted. After that's all done, there's a new layer of asphalt that goes over the top of that. So it does two things. It's cheaper. They don't have to add as much new material, and it provides a better, it's not a crack-free surface, but it's a reduced crack surface that they like this process to give them a better final result. So that's what they're going to use in this, on that project.
And they're not hauling so much material on it.
Correct.
And we did have a presentation on the longevity of various methods of resurfacing, and this is actually a longer wear time before it has to
be resurfaced again.
The more traditional mill and overlay.
Yeah.
Even their micro overlay on that little section of East College Drive has held up a lot better than I thought it would.
They'll be doing that same process on the section of road west of town. So they've already got that on one section, and they'll be extending that as well. They go up to like 3/4 of an inch thick. They used to go thinner than that, but they didn't find the results that they wanted, so they've gone a little bit thicker for that. It's called micro mill.
So with that, I'll move to Craig.
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Steve?
Community Services Advisory Board did not meet. EDA did meet, and there was a couple of things. True Shrimp is progressing as expected, and excited to get that on board and everything developed. It does look like one of the first harbors is probably going to go down to Laverne. We worked as hard as we could, but for their reasons, they had their own. That's the way it is. One of the things that came up was, and I thought it was a good thing, was the whole convention center in Springstead with the financing. One of the questions was, would there be a way to go back to Springstead who should in their business know what the financing plan should be and maybe recover some of the cost of that, because they should know about that 5-year deal breaker that happened. So that was one of the things that brought up. I don't know if Cal talked to Nicholas about that, or Carla, or...
He has not yet.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve. Bud?
I have no report.
David?
The Police Advisory Board met on June 15th and interviewed 5 candidates for the 2 open positions. And we'll be having a meeting, let's see, next week, I believe, to assist in the identification of the finalists. Excuse me. On the same day, June 15, the Convention and Visitors Bureau met. And Airport, Glenn, by our normal schedule, we meet on Independence Day. That won't happen, but do you expect a July meeting otherwise?
We don't know yet. We'd like to see what the return on our request to the feds is.
Okay, thank you.
Jim?
Nothing.
We will then move then to council member individual items. Greg?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have, I've received a handful of complaints, primarily from one individual in the North Bruce Street neighborhood, based on questions or concerns about the enforcement of our noise ordinance, and specifically as it relates to the scheduling time of day of pickup of recycling. And we've had it's very cordial, but very pointed concerns about backup alarms and then just the noise, and it's primarily the 3:30 a.m. The little bit that I've researched it, I know that there's some safety things about doing middle of the night pickups where you don't have pedestrian and limited vehicle traffic, but I guess I don't know what our position is on that. I know legally, they can't turn the backup alarms off. They can't turn them down. They have to meet a certain requirement. I do know that at one point in time, I think Waste Management did a company-wide policy that they don't start doing any pickups before 6 a.m. in their community. So I'm just throwing this out there as a discussion point to spur conversation. I think I could effectively argue this case either way to build a case of why it should go one way or the other. But this gentleman is pretty concerned about the weekly interruption of his sleep patterns based on apparently he's in an area where the trucks have to do a turnaround. So it's a repeat constant backup alarm. And then of course the tipping and banging, and apparently where they do the turnaround, he gets to listen to it up one side of the street and then of course turn around and back down the other side. So we've probably had a half a dozen exchange, and then I've just had a couple other people in conversation have mentioned the same thing. I've not consulted with Mr. Ritter and I know that this is a county contract, not a city contract for recycling.
For recycling it is, but for waste collection, we do license the waste hauler. Right. So that may be a topic for the, I suppose, Legislative Ordinance Committee if we want to put any additional requirements or expectations in our licensing for waste haulers.
Is this something that maybe or do we just want to have a conversation with the haulers? Maybe they think we want this early. I mean, they may have a preference to change their shift too. I don't know. I thought about calling and talking to the Ritters and to see what they said, and I thought, no, I probably best bring it here first and just start the thought and dialogue. I'm not looking for an answer. I just want to kind of seed a conversation about it.
Dennis, do you have an opinion on this,
I think from a safety standpoint, they want to get started early before the pedestrians, before the vehicles are out there. It's easy for them to move on the street. And I think if it's a private business, they set their own hours of working. It's kind of the way I feel.
We do have a noise ordinance, though.
Well, I also do think, Craig, that his employees double up. Is they do the recycling in the morning, then they haul the containers. They do the recycling early in the morning, then they're hauling the containers, the boxes for us contractors at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly, and
so
other communities.
Yeah, so that comes to a cost effective. You know, if we want a cheaper bid, he's doubling up his employees to keep his costs down. They give us a better price too.
The only thing I can think of possibly, and again, I don't know exactly, I didn't dig into exactly where this is because I tried to answer the question more in general, not to get on a onesie-twosie restricting how people operate their business, but I do understand and sympathize with his concern, and possibly, depending on where he is, it might even be a route modification. Yeah, yeah.
Flip the routes around and make it so that his spot is later in the day.
And Glenn, what I can do, if you guys want to have a conversation and kind of look into it, I can give you the specific address, the individual at some point, if we want to look at some kind of, but maybe we can try to get them to devise a route that doesn't include backup alarms. Or minimize them.
We'll discuss it.
Sure.
I've never seen the contract. You know, so it's apparently a county contract.
Right.
So I've never seen the
recycling is a
contract.
county contract. Yeah.
And whether or not we have the ability to set route times or.
But this could be, you know, FedEx, UPS has right turn policies in cities for delivery. They don't make left turns.
Right.
They make 3 rights better than 1 left. So possibly a conversation that we have with the companies that provide the service might be to just change the traffic pattern to eliminate or minimize the amount of backup alarms. Because I think the real threat here is backup alarms.
And when you bring up the policy, you know, if you look in waste management, when I used to talk to Bill on it, I think they have a no backup policy.
Well,
because of safety concerns.
Absolutely. And so I'm just, I don't have a decision on this, but I think, you know, at first I was just going to, I kind of just kept putting it off that, well, we don't restrict business. And then the more I thought about it, and this gentleman makes some very good points, and we've had a number of follow-ups, and I know he's frustrated, and I fully understand that. The more I thought about that, no, you know, this is a good conversation to have, and maybe there's some improvements there that we just haven't explored. And I don't want to tell our businesses exactly how to operate, but by the same token, if there's a way that we can improve things, I think we can play a part of that too. So that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Greg, for following up on that.
I had a couple of things. Number one, a constituent brought up trees on downtown area, and I talked to Mr. Olson, and that got reconciled fairly quickly, and so I appreciate very much that. The other issue is I got a person who complained to me about grass, and apparently he lives on Peltier Street. I'm not sure, it's not in my district, I don't know where it is. But his lawn abuts up against the railroad right-of-way. We have an 8-inch restriction, but in the right-of-way, apparently the railroad is letting it go to about this high.
Yep.
And he used to mow it. It was flat, but apparently somebody came in, whether it was the city or the railroad, and changed the bank so that now it's unsafe for him to mow, and so he won't do it. But he's got 3-foot grass around that's becoming a problem. So he wanted me to just ask what the options are.
That's a real difficult one, and we've discussed with that property owner improvements that could be made along the railroad. One of them is there's not adequate drainage along the railroad embankment. There's a lot of trees, and people have pushed dirt to the end of the street and things like that. So we do have a project scheduled for creating a drainage swale down to an existing culvert that goes through the under the railroad. Our problem with that one is that that culvert is 3/4 full of dirt, if not a little more. So we proposed to the railroad that we would remove the dirt from that culvert, and they said absolutely not. Don't take that dirt out. The culvert itself might be in such a condition that the culvert would collapse, and we don't want you removing the dirt from the culvert. So now it's either maybe push a new culvert through the railroad grade with a new permit and a new cost to the city to do that. However, getting the water to that point, that is important to us. There's a grove, there's volunteer trees that have grown up over the last 30 years or more that we really do need to take out. So we're creating a project to do some of the drainage work. In saying that, that should help the grass and weeds. However, the railroad would not be responsive to taking care of their greater than 8-inch tall grass. They won't. So even if we have a regulation on grass, and we could probably go in there and work within the right-of-way and take it out, we'd have to have special permission to work within 25 feet of the track. And so it doesn't work out. We can't spray it with Roundup. We can't do anything like that on the right-of-way. So in his condition, I think we can do some things to help, but I don't think we're going to be taking care of the railroad right-of-way grass problem. Dennis might want to comment on that too. It's a tough one.
Issue for quite some time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Where that is, where Peltier Street, is that where it's 100-foot right away, or is that?
No, 50.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Anything?
No, sir.
What?
I have no report.
David?
Nothing.
Jim?
I had the same constituent visit with me about trees, and again, thank you, Glenn. And that's where you and I had that discussion. Maybe it's something the council, city staff need to look at, is who is responsible for the streets, the maintenance, the sweeping of the sidewalk, cleaning of the sidewalk. You and I had that conversation. I asked you, and you said you didn't really know. I mean,
it's a property owner's responsibility to take care of the.
But that's state property, isn't it?
It is not in the downtown only. The right-of-way changes for that Main Street part. When we did the downtown reconstruction project, that's when that was found out. Now, we need to do some discussion about improvements in the downtown, continued improvements in downtown. We want to make sure that we present a good community vision to people coming into and out of the community. On what basis should the property owners participate in that? That's kind of always been the discussion. Snow removal, banners, sidewalk sweeping, keeping up the area outside the bar, for instance, has always been kind of a tough one. So that's something I think we should engage in with that downtown committee.
Yes, because we walked around and looked at tree planters, and there's some that have deteriorated greatly, and like this gentleman said, he says, our assessment payments aren't even done yet. And we have, and you and I chatted about, I think the city is proactively looking at doing something there, but it is an issue, and these folks have assessments that are still being paid, and they have a product that has failed, per se.
Right. Mayor, to throw it into that mix a little bit, because I like the discussion about doing the sidewalk maintenance, like on Main Street. If the property owners do a sweep, maybe every other, even week or odd week, Saturday we do a street sweep at 5 o'clock in the morning. So Friday night they sweep their sidewalk into the curb. We're going to pick it up. I know there's some MS4 requirements. I look at when we got our audit, we look at our enterprise funds, and our stormwater fund is an enterprise fund, and as we move in and get more history as an MS4 city, we've talked about the need for focused staff and some of the other things that they could take care of. And I think these kinds of conversations, it talks about lawn clippings and yard raking and all those other things. And when we look at the things that we're faced with for the condition of the Redwood River downstream of Marshall and the assignment that's been given to the city of Marshall for responsibility for that condition, that falls into the MS4 too, into stormwater. So whatever we can do to source reduce what goes into the storm catch basins reduces what goes in the river and reduces our potential future liability for the water condition there. So that's the intent of that stormwater program. And so as we go through this, I think when we answer some of these questions, those things all puzzle piece together.
I'll give you another example of the things that are known that are difficult to get people to work with us on. We sweep the downtown every Friday morning. Okay, so if the people along the street understand that we do that, if they would go out there with the broom on Thursday and put it out into the street, they know that we're going to pick it up. In the wintertime, after every 2-inch snow, we come down there at 2 o'clock in the morning and start removing snow from that district. Very seldom do we have anyone that pushes their snow out from their sidewalk for our schedule. So we do it twice, at least, okay, every time. So it's one of those things where we can discuss that, but really to get an effective product, the city almost has to hire it done to get it done on that basis. Maybe it's a cost savings to us not to have to do it twice.
We do it nice because we do it twice.
Yeah, we do it nice. So that's the kind of stuff just to think about when a property owner says, gee, somebody should sweep our sidewalks off. Yeah. We agree.
So Glenn, I thank you for engaging in that conversation about cooperation. I'd be happy to be involved in that, as probably others would too. So.
And then the other point somebody brought up to me is, as we start doing our reconstruction of streets, a lot of times when they're done with a street project, they leave a lot of loose asphalt behind. If that's something
should be swept.
It should, but they pointed it because I think in our neighborhood, Redwood Street, Jean Street was just recently redone, and there was a lot of loose. And I had some citizens say, this gets on our cars. So if you could just make a note or check that's cleaned up when we're done, they'd be really appreciative. And one final note is I'd like to thank Nick for when I got elected onto the council. He was very helpful with books and information, and I appreciate that, and thank you.
Very good. The only thing I have to add, and good discussion, is we have talked on and off about the city hall planning, so at the next meeting I'd like to have some discussion about reactivation of the city hall planning committee. With that, let's move then to the next agenda item, which is staff reports. Nick, you've already discussed. I don't know if you have anything more you want to add at this point.
Just once again, thank you for the opportunity that was given to me.
Thank you, Nick. Glenn?
I have 2 items, one good news and one not good news, but I'll send around the good news. This came from the ATP meeting that we had last week. It shows the 2017 construction projects in this district. When you've taken a look at them, if you give a copy to the reporter, that would be great. The next item is not one of my favorites. And this is pictures of our compost location. And I'm dismayed at the activities that our residents and others produce and dispose of at the compost site. So if you'd please take a look at these. And none of this should be going to the compost pile. So we will be discussing the installation of cameras that are capable of reading license plates or seeing people or looking at vehicles, because this is very expensive for us to take care of, and this is not out of the ordinary. I go out there and there's appliances, there's bricks and rocks and all kinds of wood tables and furniture, and it's real easy to just drive behind the big pile and dump it off. So I want you to be aware of it, and we're going to address it, but I don't want to close off that site. That site is used by 70%, 80% of the people in this community. So valuable.
And beyond the community.
And beyond the community, yes. It's a valuable
Which is fine
asset,
if they behave
which
themselves.
is just fine. But this is ridiculous.
Well,
truckloads.
Remind me, is there a placard out there? I think
Yes.
there is that says fines up to.
Oh, yes. And there's everything that's accepted and everything that's not accepted.
There's even, not only are there signs, but there's another sign that says read.
Read the signs.
Have we
done our duty.
Have we ever broken anybody's nose over this? Have we fined anyone?
We have had employees that when they're working out there have stopped and said, pick that back up again and
I've
take
done
it
that
with
myself.
you. Yeah. We,
I'll call
we have
911
that.
if you don't want to do it.
We're pretty vocal about keeping that resource. So I just want to mention that.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. That's all.
And this is a permit that we get by the state that if this
That's
behavior
right.
doesn't change, we don't have an option. We'll lose the right to have this.
Correct.
I just have legal stuff. I don't have anything exciting like long grass or garbage here, so I don't have anything else.
It's like Alice's restaurant.
So agenda item number 29, pending agenda items. Any pending agenda items? One thing that we will need to add on there, with Carla, I actually will be meeting with the staff tomorrow, but need to add on this budget schedule. Agenda item number 30, information items, including building permits, upcoming meetings. Again, we'll update that.
Hey, Jane, on upcoming meetings, can we get the Southwest Amateur Sports Commission meeting schedule on that? Scott, what do you think? That should be on there, shouldn't it? Sure. Yeah, and then have Rob get the Merit Center on. I've bugged him 3 times. Maybe if you yell at him and get it on there.
Which also reminds me, and Scott, you can help me with the date on this, but July 12th at 10 in the morning, is that the time?
Walk through.
No, there'll be a ribbon cutting ceremony for the completion of the Camden Bike Trail.
I know that's the date. I'm not sure about the time.
I'm pretty sure it's 10 in the morning. So look for information coming
Where
out on that.
that'll be at the fairgrounds, or where will you?
I think, I believe, Scott, you have a planning meeting coming up on Thursday, and you and the other people on the committee are going to determine the location. My suggestion is the old Bud Rose property or somewhere in that vicinity.
Mm-hmm.
And Glenn, probably a good possibility that the trail will be completed by the time.
Gee, it would be nice. Just the railroad part.
With that, it brings us to agenda item number 32, to consider adjourning. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by David to adjourn this meeting discussion. We'll move to a vote.
Voice vote, please, on my computer is acting weird.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
It's just not my computer.
You started.
Gotta make it
It worked its way around.
Stir rock.